Shalom, all praise to Yahweh Shem Shah, double lines to the apostles GMS. This is Amnama Allah coming at you with another video. And in this video, I want to be focusing on the book of 1 Peter, chapter 3, verse 1. Okay, going into the topic of the husbands being won over by the conversation of the wives. And what does that mean? So I'm just going to touch into this briefly. I'm not going to go into that many scriptures. This could be a 20-30 minute video, but I just want to hit the fine points. So let's get right to it. 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 1. Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands. So first let's look into that word subjection.
Strong's G 5293. Hupatasso.
Hupatasso. Okay. Let's look at these words here. To arrange under, to subordinate. So if you're subordinate, you're under the order of someone. To subject, put in subjection. To subject oneself, obey. To submit to one's control. To yield to one's admonition or advice. To obey, be subject. Now that word yield. Okay. Scroll down. From dictionary.com, it says yield. Submit, surrender means to give way or give up to someone or something. To yield is to concede under some degree of pressure. Well, that's good there. So the word yield means to surrender or give way or give up to someone or something. And the word admonition, to yield to one's admonition or advice. Admonition is a warning. This is from that was from dictionary.com. This is basically AI overview from these different websites you see here on the top right, on the right hand side of your screen right there. An admonition is a warning or criticism about a piece of advice. An admonition is a warning or criticism about behavior or piece of advice that also serves as a warning. Let's see what else we got here. Dictionary.com. An act of admonishing, counsel, advice, or caution. Because when you go up here, it says, what is an admonition? The Greek word usually translated admonish is noutateo, which means literally to place on one's mind. It is also translated counsel, warn, and instruct. And it gives you a scripture right here. It is a part of a group of words, see 2 Timothy 4:2, chapter 4 verse 2, that range from correcting the ignorant to rebuking the obstinate. So the word admonish means to correct the ignorant, to rebuke the obstinate, and it means literally to place on one's mind. It's also translated as counsel or to warn. So that woman supposed to yield or give in or surrender to her husband's admonishment, to her husband's counsel, to her husband's advice, to her husband's decisions. To obey, be subject. This word was a Greek military term meaning to arrange troop divisions in a military fashion under the command of a leader. See that? Leader. In non-military use, it was a voluntary attitude of giving in, cooperating, assuming responsibility, and carrying a burden. So in a non-military use, which is the way we're speaking of now, in this particular instance, is a voluntary attitude. So when something is voluntary, you're deciding to do it, you're making a decision to do it. Voluntary. Something is done or given by choice without being forced or compelled. So you're not being forced, you're not being compelled. You're doing it voluntarily. That's from AI Overview. And it says from vocabulary.com, voluntary is an adjective that describes something you do because you want to, without being influenced or forced into it. So it's voluntary. Okay? So they're supposed to yield voluntarily. You're supposed to give in voluntarily. And that word obstinate means like to stubbornly refuse to change one's opinion. So when we read a few moments ago, I believe it was the word admonish. It went to I believe it mentioned rebuke the obstinate or correct the obstinate to admonish. So that's somebody that's refusing, refusing to change their opinion or behavior. So you gotta admonish them when they're going off. That woman that you with. But let's go back. And she has to yield to that admonishment willingly by choice. Yield to that correction. So back in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1. Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives. Now what does that mean? Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word. So when it says that if any obey not the word, who is that talking about? It's talking about the husbands. So these are talking about wives being subject to your husbands, even if that if any obey not the word. So even if their husband was an unbeliever, they still were supposed to be in subjection to them. Because even though she was a believer and her husband is not, the fact that she is a believer doesn't supersede or take authority over the fact that her husband is still the authority. So if a man is not a believer and his woman is a believer, guess what? She still has to yield to her husband's authority. Because even though she's a believer, that doesn't supersede the relationship that they have. That doesn't supersede that. Okay, yeah, she's a believer, he's not, but she's still to be in subjection to him. Because even though she believes, that civil aspect of their relationship, her belief doesn't override that. It doesn't supersede that. And I use the word civil, right? Now, if you go on Google and you type in the word civil laws and definitions, it's from AI Overview. It says, civil law is a legal system that governs the rights and obligations of individuals and the relationships between them. It's also known as private law. But that's the point I want to get. Civil law is a legal system that governs the rights and obligations of individuals and their relationships between them. When you go down to Oxford Languages, it says, the system of law concerned with private relations between members of a community rather than criminal, military, or religious affairs. So civil law is a legal system that governs the rights and obligations of individuals and the relationships between them. So even though she's a believer and her husband is not a believer, she's still supposed to be in subjection to her husband, because the civil law, just of a man and a woman, there are certain rights and obligations in that relationship that is still supposed to exist, which is the fact that the man is still the authority. All right? So it's not like, oh, she a believer, her man not, so she could do what she wants. No, it don't work that way. It don't work that way, because that's the order the Most High set up for man to be over woman. That if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives. Now what does that mean? That if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives. So even if those husbands obey not the word, meaning even if they aren't believers, they also may be won without the word, meaning what? They also may be won without preaching. What does it mean that they may be without the word won by the conversation of the wives? That they may still become believers, not by preaching, but rather by the conversation of the wives, meaning the conduct of the wife. So yes, she is a believer. He is not a believer. But by her conduct, still being in subjection to her husband, though she is a believer and he is not, her very conduct, her very morals and very principles, and how she conducts herself as a believer may win him over and cause him to be a believer, because even though he is not and she is, she still is in subjection unto him. So therefore, the faith that she has, though he does not believe and she does, she still lives by the order of the man being the authority. And based upon her conduct, meaning her conversation, her way of life, that may win him over, and he may begin to believe. So he's therefore being won without the word, but rather by the conversation of the wife. So he's not becoming a believer based upon preaching, being taught, but rather becoming a believer based upon the conduct, meaning the conversation. The conversation meaning the conduct or the way of life of the wife. Because though she believes that he does not, her conduct wins him over because she's still living her life according to the scriptures, even though he's not a believer. She's still under subjection. And by looking at her morals and her principles and her scruples that are part of this walk of faith that we're in, that may win him over. And say, oh, let me see what this is about, because, she's still conducting herself like this. She's still doing that, even though she's a believer and I'm not. And that's how he becomes won over by the conversation of the wife. So it's not that she necessarily taught him, but she's still in subjection to him, even though he's a believer and she's not. Even though she's a believer and he's not, she's still in subjection to him, regardless of his unbelief. And by her maintaining that way of life in the scriptures, living by the laws, statutes, and commandments of the scriptures, even though she lives by them and he does not, that can win him over. And he may begin to believe. So when somebody's around you and this is maybe their belief, and you see how they conduct themselves, then what happened? Now you want to know more about it. Well, that's the situation that they're given here. St. John 17:17. Sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. So he's still being sanctified through the truth. Thy word is truth, which the truth is the word. Though he's not being taught, he's being sanctified through the Spirit of the Lord, because based upon how her conversation, meaning her conduct, her way of life, in the truth, then that could therefore win him over. Therefore allowing him to be, therefore he's now what? He's sanctified. Because he may start believing. Okay? Now here's the word devolves. Devolves. Transfer or delegate power to a lower level. See if I get a better definition. Devolve. Okay. Devolve. Definition, meaning. To pass on something such as responsibility, rights, or powers from one person or entity to another. So that man being sanctified through the Spirit, that man becoming a believer, it's not due to preaching, but is rather through the conversation of the wife. So it's like that responsibility has been devolved to the wife. In other words, passed on to the wife by responsibility, rights, or powers. In other words, it's not someone teaching him that's causing them to believe, but rather the Most High is using her, has passed on it to her, to that woman, by show of conduct, causing that man to believe. So it's been devolved to her. In other words, it's not a preacher that's making him believe through the Spirit of the Lord. Rather, it's been passed on or devolved to the wife, that her conduct can make that man a believer, as opposed to someone preaching the word of the gospel unto him. See? It's been passed from one person or entity to another. So it's not a preacher, it's not a teacher that's teaching him this. It's not a prophet or apostle that's coming to him and teaching him this, is causing him to believe. That has been devolved or passed on to the wife through the Spirit of the Lord. You know what? I'm going to let her conduct be what he sees that makes him a believer. All right? This is from dictionary.com. Deportment. Right? You look at the word deportment, it says demeanor, conduct, behavior, the conduct or obedience of a child in school as graded by a teacher. So, when you go back to 1 Peter 3:1, it says he's won over not by the word, but by the conversation of the wife. So, it was not a preacher, a teacher, a prophet, an apostle that taught him, but rather that was devolved or passed on to the wife by way of her deportment, meaning by way of her demeanor, by way of her conduct, by way of her behavior. That is what led to him to believe. And that can happen. A person can believe something and someone else cannot, but by being in a company and seeing how they conduct themselves, it can make them a believer. There's brothers in the truth who may have been believing and had, friends in the world that they knew that wasn't believers, but just by being around them, seeing how they conduct themselves, I want to see what that's about. That can happen. And it has happened. Now this is back in 1 Peter 3:1. Go to that word conversation. See what that means.
Strong's G 391. Anastrafe.
Anastrafe. Men of life, conduct, behavior, deportment. See that? Didn't I go to that word deportment earlier? There you go. Literally a turning back is translated men of life living. So that's why I said here that if any obey not the word, they also may be one without the word. They also without the word be won by the conversation of the wives. So the one without the word is not being taught to them, but it's the conversation of the wives that's winning them over. That's why I went to the Spirit, St. John 17:17, sanctify them through that truth. That word is truth. So he's still being sanctified by the truth, though he's not being taught it. It's the conversation that she's conducting herself in the truth, which is still the Spirit of the Lord. Even though the word is not being taught to him, it's still the Spirit of the Lord because she's doing what the word says do. So sanctify them through that truth. That word is truth. The word is truth. The scriptures is truth. Everything that's in it. So when you conducting yourself in accordance to the scriptures, that's someone that's sanctified in the truth. And when you start to witness someone else's conduct in the truth, and you become a believer, then that's you being sanctified through the truth. The word is truth. Because it's the conduct of the word that the people who are in the truth are engaging in. Because the truth and the word is the same thing. It just gives you a deeper explanation when it says the word is truth. Sanctify them through that truth. But what's the truth? That word is truth. So when you're doing what the word says, she's doing what the truth says. And if you therefore see that and believe, you become sanctified. So there's more I can get to on that. But I'm gonna close that there because I just thought this was an interesting verse here. So with that, I'm gonna close and say, "Oh, praise Yahweh Shema Shah, that belongs to the Apostle GMS." I know I repeated the same thing multiple times, but I just do it to get into your head. Scripture states that it's this quote that goes, "Repetition is the mother of all learning, or the father of all learning." In other words, if you do something repetitiously, it starts to get into your head, man. Sometimes you gotta repeat yourself. So with that, I'm gonna say Shalom.